Catherine Morrison stirred the pasta sauce with one hand while balancing her phone against her ear with the other. The kitchen smelled of garlic and basil, and golden evening light streamed through the checkered curtains she'd sewn herself 20 years ago when she and David first moved to Millbrook. "You're absolutely sure about the decorations?" Kate asked, watching steam rise from the pot. "I know you've been through so much with the divorce, Susie. I don't want to burden you with—" "Kate, stop!" Susan Blake's voice carried that familiar warmth that had comforted Kate through college heartbreaks and new mother anxieties. "This is your 20th anniversary. David deserves something special, and so do you. Besides, keeping busy helps me forget about Richard and all his lies." Kate smiled, stirring more vigorously. "What would I do without you? You've been my anchor since college. That's what best friends do. Now I'll handle the flowers and music at Riverside Diner. I already called ahead. They're setting up the private room exactly how David likes it. Soft lighting, jazz playing low, those white roses he got you for your first date." Something flickered in Kate's chest. She paused mid-stir. "How do you remember that detail? I barely remember telling you about our first date." Susie laughed, but it sounded forced. "You've told that story 100 times, honey. Plus, David mentioned it when we bumped into each other at Miller's Market last week." Kate frowned. David hadn't mentioned seeing Susie at the market. But then again, he'd been working so many extra shifts lately, trying to save money for some surprise he wouldn't tell her about. Sweet man, still romantic after all these years. "He's been working late again tonight," Kate said, checking the clock. "Something about inventory at the hardware store. But he promised to be home by 7 for dinner." "He's such a good provider," Susie murmured. "Listen, I should go get ready. See you at 8? As Kate hung up, she felt lighter. Tomorrow marked exactly 20 years since she'd said "I do" to David Morrison in the little church on Maple Street. Susie had been her maid of honor, radiant in yellow silk, beaming as Kate walked down the aisle toward the man Susie had introduced her to at a college party. Kate was reaching for her anniversary dress when David's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He'd forgotten it again. Third time this month. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from S. "Can't wait for tonight." Kate stared at the message. S? The only S in David's contacts should be Susie. But why would she text David about tonight? Maybe she was coordinating the surprise somehow. Kate set the phone back down, but unease settled in her stomach like a stone. The private dining room at Riverside Diner glowed with soft candlelight when Kate arrived at 7:50. Susie had outdone herself. White roses in crystal vases, jazz music drifting from hidden speakers, and fairy lights wrapped around the windows overlooking the creek. But something felt off. Susie paced near the window, fidgeting with her wedding ring, the one from her marriage to Richard, which had ended 6 months ago. She wore a navy dress that hugged her figure, and her blonde hair was styled in loose waves. When she spotted Kate, she rushed over with nervous energy. "You look beautiful," Susie gushed, embracing Kate a bit too tightly. "That red dress is perfect with your hair. David won't be able to take his eyes off you." "This is incredible, Susie." "Thank you." Kate surveyed the room. "You remembered everything perfectly. Almost like you know David's taste better than I do." Susie's laugh came out sharp. "Don't be silly. I just pay attention when you talk about what makes him happy." They settled at the round table, but Susie couldn't sit still. She rearranged the silverware twice, adjusted the flowers, and kept checking her reflection in the window. Kate had never seen her best friend so jittery. "Are you okay? You seem nervous." "Just excited for you," Susie said quickly. "It's not every day your best friend celebrates 20 years of marriage. You and David are so lucky to have what you have." Kate reached across and squeezed Susie's hand. "Your time will come again. The right man is out there waiting." Susie's eyes glistened, but she looked away. "Sometimes I wonder if I even know what the right man looks like anymore." At 8:15, Kate checked her phone. "He should be here by now. This isn't like David." "Traffic, probably," Susie suggested, but her voice sounded strained. Finally, at 8:30, David burst through the door, his dark hair disheveled and his tie askew. Sorry, Frank needed help with the new shipment, and I lost track of time." But as he apologized to Kate, his eyes found Susie first. Just for a moment, a quick glance that carried weight Kate couldn't interpret. Susie's cheeks flushed pink, and she suddenly became fascinated with her wine glass. "Frank?" Kate asked as David sat down. "But I thought you said you were doing inventory alone." "Right, inventory with Frank. You know how it is." David loosened his tie and avoided eye contact. "This place looks amazing. Did you do all this yourself, honey?" "Susie did everything," Kate said, watching both their faces. "She knew exactly what you'd like." David's smile seemed forced. That's that's really thoughtful. Thank you, Susie." Throughout dinner, Kate noticed small things that pricked at her consciousness like thorns. When the waiter asked for their orders, Susie said, "I'll have the salmon," and David nodded as if he'd expected it. He laughed too loudly at Susie's story about her landlord, and when Kate mentioned their perfect marriage, both David and Susie shifted uncomfortably. 20 years, Kate mused, cutting her chicken. "Sometimes I can't believe how blessed we've been. No major fights, no secrets, complete trust. It's everything I dreamed of in college." Silence settled over the table like fog. David cleared his throat and excused himself to take a work call. Moments later, Susie stood abruptly. "I need some fresh air. This room is a bit stuffy." Kate watched through the window as her husband and best friend stood on the diner's porch, their heads bent close in conversation. Susie touched David's arm, not a casual gesture, but something intimate, familiar. David glanced toward the window, and Kate quickly looked away, her heart hammering against her ribs. When they returned to the table, both seemed composed, but the air felt different, charged. Kate spent the rest of the evening feeling like a stranger at her own anniversary dinner, watching two people who seemed to share secrets she wasn't part of. The next morning, Kate stood at her kitchen sink, washing dishes and replaying the previous evening. David sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone and eating cereal. "You seemed distant last night," Kate ventured, scrubbing a plate harder than necessary. "Just tired. You know how busy work has been." David didn't look up from his phone. "About that, I was thinking of surprising you with lunch at the store today. What time works best?" David's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Actually, Frank and I will be in the back warehouse most of the day. Inventory, you know. Very boring stuff. Maybe another time?" Kate dried her hands slowly. "Another late night tonight? Probably. This shipment is huge, and corporate wants everything cataloged by Friday." David stood, kissing her cheek absently. "Don't wait up." After he left, Kate called Susie, needing to hear her friend's reassuring voice. But when Susie answered, she sounded rushed and distracted. "Kate, hi. What's up? I wanted to thank you again for last night. It was beautiful, but I felt like something was off. Did you notice David acting strange?" A long pause. "Strange how?" "I don't know. Distant, secretive. And that conversation you two had outside—" "Oh, that was nothing," Susie interrupted quickly. "He was just asking about my job search. Speaking of which, I have an interview this morning, so I should run." "An interview? You didn't mention looking for work." "It's new. Gotta go. Love you." The line went dead, leaving Kate staring at her phone. Susie had never mentioned being unhappy with her current position at the bank. In fact, just last month she talked about getting a promotion. Something cold settled in Kate's chest as she realized David had mentioned traffic delays last night, but Millbrook was a town of 8,000 people. There was never traffic. That afternoon, Kate drove past Morrison Hardware on Main Street. David's blue pickup truck wasn't in the parking lot. She circled the block twice, thinking maybe he'd parked in back, but the employee lot was empty except for Frank's old Buick. Her hands trembled as she pulled over and called the store. "Morrison Hardware, Frank speaking." "Hi, Frank, it's Kate. Is David around?" "David? He took the day off, said he had personal business. Thought you'd know." The world tilted. "Right, of course. Thanks, Frank." Kate sat in her car, staring at the empty parking space where her husband's truck should have been. 20 years of marriage, and David had lied to her face over breakfast. But why? And where was he? As she drove home through Millbrook's tree-lined streets, Kate passed Susie's apartment complex and saw a familiar blue pickup parked outside Building C. Her heart stopped. Kate pulled into the visitor parking and stared at David's truck. The same dent in the bumper from when he'd backed into their mailbox 3 years ago. The same "Support Our Troops" sticker their nephew had given him. There was no mistake. She sat there for 45 minutes, watching. At 2:15, Susie's apartment door opened, and she stepped outside wearing a pale robe. She walked to David's truck, opened the passenger door, and retrieved something. A jacket Kate recognized as David's favorite flannel shirt. Susie looked around nervously before hurrying back inside, clutching the jacket like something precious. Kate's vision blurred. Her best friend since college, her husband of 20 years. The two people she trusted most in the world. She drove home in a daze, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes had seen. There had to be an explanation. Maybe David was helping Susie with something, a repair or moving furniture. Maybe the jacket was innocent. But deep in her heart, Kate knew she was lying to herself, just like they'd been lying to her. Kate drove home in a fog, her mind racing between denial and devastating clarity. She parked in her driveway and sat staring at her house, the yellow cottage with white trim that she and David had painted together their first spring in Millbrook. The garden beds she'd planted, the porch swing where they'd shared countless evening conversations. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. Inside, she moved through the rooms like a sleepwalker, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign. The wedding photo on the mantel showed her and David beaming at each other, with Susie glowing beside them in her yellow bridesmaid dress. Kate picked up the frame and studied Susie's face, searching for signs of the deception that had apparently been brewing for months. Her phone rang, startling her. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, honey, just checking in. How's your day going?" Kate's throat constricted. His voice sounded so normal, so loving. "Fine, just, quiet. Where are you?" "Still at the store. This inventory's taking forever. Frank and I are going to grab some dinner later, so I'll be really late tonight. Don't wait up, okay?" The lies rolled off his tongue so easily. Kate closed her eyes, gripping the phone. "Okay, I love you." "Love you too, sweetheart." After he hung up, Kate called Morrison Hardware again. "Frank, it's Kate. Sorry to bother you again. Is David still there?" Frank's confusion was audible. "Kate, honey, David hasn't been in all day. Took a personal day, remember? Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine. Thanks, Frank." Kate set the phone down with shaking hands. David wasn't just lying about where he was lying about who he was with. He'd claimed he was working late with Frank, but Frank confirmed David wasn't even at the store. That evening, Kate found herself driving past Susie's apartment complex again. David's truck sat in the same spot, like an accusation in the fading daylight. This time, she didn't leave. She parked across the street and waited, her heart hammering with each passing minute. At 7:30, she saw movement in Susie's third-floor window. Two silhouettes close together. Kate's stomach lurched as she watched them embrace. There was no mistaking the intimacy of the gesture. This wasn't a friendly hug or comfort between friends. This was lovers reuniting. Kate fumbled for her phone and called Susie's number. Through the window, she saw one of the figures move away and answer a phone. "Hello?" Susie's voice was breathless. "Hi, it's me. Just wanted to check on you. How did your job interview go?" A pause. Kate watched Susie pace to the window and look out, but the angle prevented her from seeing Kate's car. "Oh, the interview. It went, well, really well, actually. They might call back tomorrow." "That's wonderful. What kind of position?" Another pause. "Administrative assistant at the medical center." "Listen, Kate, I'm actually feeling a bit under the weather. Can I call you tomorrow?" "Of course, feel better." Kate hung up and watched as Susie returned to the other figure, unmistakably David by his height and the way he moved. She lied again, effortlessly, while standing in the arms of Kate's husband. The next morning, Kate woke with gritty eyes and a plan. She needed proof, something concrete that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. She waited until David left for his shift at the hardware store, then began searching the house systematically. In David's dresser drawer, beneath old t-shirts, she found a prepaid cell phone she'd never seen before. Her hands trembled as she turned it on and scrolled through the messages. Months of text between David and someone listed as S2 filled the screen. The messages made Kate's vision blur with their intimacy and casual planning of secret meetings. Can't stop thinking about yesterday afternoon. When Kate goes to her sister's this weekend, come over early. I feel terrible lying to her, but I can't give you up. She suspects something. We need to be more careful. Kate sat on their bed, the bed she'd shared with David for 20 years, and read message after message documenting their relationship. The earliest text dated back 4 months, right after Susie's divorce was finalized. They'd been meeting regularly, using Kate's work schedule and social commitments to plan their encounters. One message from 3 days ago made her blood run cold. Kate wants to plan something special for your anniversary. I told her I'd help with decorations. The irony is killing me. Kate dropped the phone as if it burned. Susie hadn't just betrayed her. She'd helped orchestrate their anniversary celebration while carrying on in relationship with David. The woman who'd held Kate's hand through her father's funeral, who'd been her maid of honor, who'd shared every major moment of her adult life, had been playing an elaborate game of deception. That afternoon, Kate sat in her car outside Miller's Market, the small grocery store where everyone in Millbrook shopped. She'd positioned herself where she could see both entrances, waiting. At 3:15, she spotted them. David and Susie walked out together, not touching but staying close. They moved with the comfortable synchronization of people who knew each other's rhythms intimately. David carried 2 bags of groceries and they walked toward his truck, talking in low voices. Kate watched as David opened the passenger door for Susie, a gesture he hadn't made for Kate in years. Before Susie got in, she rose on her tiptoes and touched his face gently, a tender caress that spoke of deep familiarity. David caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. Kate's chest felt crushed, as if someone had placed a weight on her lungs. This wasn't just a physical relationship or a moment of weakness. The way they moved together, the casual intimacy, the comfort in each other's presence, this was love. Her husband was in love with her best friend. She followed them at a distance as David drove to the outskirts of town, turning down a dirt road that led to Miller's Pond. Kate parked behind a cluster of trees and watched as they walked to the water's edge, David's arm around Susie's shoulders. They sat on the old wooden dock where Kate and David had often brought picnic lunches during their early marriage. Now her husband sat in that same spot with another woman, their heads bent close together in conversation. Susie leaned against David's shoulder, and he kissed the top of her head with heartbreaking tenderness. Kate sat in her car, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the full scope of her loss. This wasn't a meaningless affair or a midlife crisis. David had fallen in love with Susie, and from what she'd witnessed, Susie loved him back. They weren't just betraying her, they were building a relationship on the ruins of her marriage. As the sun began to set, Kate watched them stand and embrace one final time before walking back to David's truck. She knew David would come home to her in an hour, probably shower off Susie's perfume, and sit down to dinner with the easy smile she'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. He'd ask about her day and tell her stories about work, lies wrapped in the familiar comfort of their shared routine. But now Kate knew the truth. Her marriage was over, had been over for months while she'd lived in blissful ignorance. Her best friend had stolen her husband, and both of them had made her complicit in her own betrayal, asking for her help planning romantic dinners while they planned their secret meetings. Kate started her car and drove home, her mind crystal clear for the first time in weeks. She had proof now, the phone, the messages, what she'd witnessed. But more than that, she had clarity about what she needed to do next. That evening, David came home at his usual time, greeting her with a kiss on the cheek and asking what was for dinner. Kate served his favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes, and watched him eat while making pleasant conversation about his day at the hardware store. He spun elaborate tales about inventory problems and difficult customers, his performance so polished that Kate almost admired his skill. "Frank mentioned you might get that promotion," Kate said, testing him. David paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Did he? Well, nothing's certain yet. You know how these things go." Another lie. Frank had mentioned no such thing because David hadn't been at the store to discuss it. Kate nodded and smiled, playing her role in their charade while mentally cataloging each deception. After dinner, as David settled in front of the television, his secret phone buzzed in his pocket. Kate watched him glance at it discreetly, then excuse himself to the bathroom. Through the closed door, she heard his muffled voice and knew he was making plans with Susie for tomorrow. When he returned, David sat beside Kate on the couch and took her hand, the same hand that had touched Susie's face hours earlier. "I love you, Kate. You know that, right?" Kate looked into his eyes, seeing a stranger wearing her husband's face. "I know," she whispered, because in that moment, she realized she did know. She knew exactly who David Morrison was, who Susan Blake was, and most importantly, who Catherine Morrison needed to become. Kate spent the night planning while David slept peacefully beside her, one arm draped over her waist in the casual intimacy of long marriage. She stared at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing, and felt nothing but cold determination. By morning, she knew exactly what she needed to do. She waited until David left for his fictional workday, then made two phone calls. The first was to Riverside Diner, reserving the same private dining room where they'd celebrated their anniversary. The second was to both David and Susie, her voice bright and cheerful as she left identical messages. "Hi, it's Kate. I want to plan a surprise party for my sister Margaret's birthday next month, and I need help brainstorming ideas. Can you meet me at Riverside Diner tonight at 7? The private room is reserved. Thanks." She arrived at the restaurant early, choosing the same round table where she'd sat 3 nights ago, blissfully unaware of the betrayal happening right in front of her. This time she came prepared. A small digital recorder sat hidden in her purse, and printed copies of David's text messages lay in a manila envelope on the empty chair beside her. Kate ordered coffee and waited, her hands steady for the first time in days. She felt strangely calm, as if she'd been holding her breath for months and could finally exhale. David arrived first at 6:50, looking confused but trying to hide it. He sat across from her, the same spot he'd occupied during their anniversary dinner, when he'd lied about working late. "Margaret's birthday?" he asked, loosening his tie. "I thought that wasn't until December." "You're right," Kate said evenly. "I lied." Before David could respond, Susie appeared in the doorway, scanning the room nervously. She wore the same navy dress from their anniversary dinner, and her blonde hair was perfectly styled. When she spotted them, relief flickered across her face, quickly replaced by wariness. "Kate." "Hi. David." Susie's greeting to David was carefully neutral, but Kate caught the slight softening in her expression, the way her eyes lingered on his face a moment too long. "Sit down, Susie," Kate said, gesturing to the chair between them. "We need to talk." As Susie settled into her seat, Kate reached for the manila envelope. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. She pulled out the first page of text messages and placed it in the center of the table, smoothing it with her palm. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went white, and Susie's hand flew to her throat. Kate watched them both, noting how they looked at each other before looking at her. A silent communication that spoke of shared guilt and panic. "I found David's second phone," Kate said conversationally as if discussing the weather. "Quite a lot of reading material. 4 months worth, actually." David started to speak, but Kate held up her hand. "I'm not finished. I followed you to Miller's Pond yesterday. I saw you at the market at Susie's apartment, through her window. I know everything." Susie began crying, quiet tears that streaked her makeup. "Kate, please, let me explain." "Oh, I want to understand," Kate interrupted, her voice remaining calm. "I want to understand how my best friend since college and my husband of 20 years could look me in the eye and lie so effortlessly. I want to understand how you helped me plan our anniversary dinner while you were planning your own meetings with my husband." She pulled out another page of messages, pointing to a specific exchange. "This one's particularly interesting. Kate wants to plan something special for your anniversary. I told her I'd help with decorations. The irony is killing me." "Your words, Susie." Susie's sobs grew louder, but Kate felt no sympathy. She continued methodically placing pages on the table, evidence of betrayal, lies, and intimate moments stolen from her marriage. David finally found his voice. "Kate, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." Kate's composure cracked slightly, a hint of steel entering her voice. Don't insult me with more lies. I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime. She pulled out the final page, a recent message from David to Susie that had made her physically ill when she'd read it. I've never felt this way about anyone, not even Kate. You make me feel alive again. The words hung in the air like poison. Kate watched David's face crumble as he realized the full scope of his exposure. Susie stopped crying and stared at the paper, her face pale with shock. You wrote that 3 days after our anniversary, Kate said quietly. After 20 years of marriage, after everything we built together, you told another woman, my best friend, that you never felt about me the way you feel about her. David leaned forward, desperation replacing his earlier composure. Kate, I never meant for this to happen. After Susie's divorce, she was so lost and hurt, and I was just trying to help. By having an affair with her? It wasn't supposed to be an affair. David's voice rose. It started as friendship, just helping her through a difficult time. But then feelings developed, and we tried to fight it. But you decided your feelings mattered more than our marriage. Kate stood up slowly, her movements precise and controlled. Both of you made that choice over and over for 4 months. Susie looked up through her tears. I never meant to hurt you. You're my best friend, Kate. You've been my best friend for over 20 years. No, Kate said firmly. Best friends don't do this. Best friends don't lie and manipulate and steal. Best friends don't help you celebrate your anniversary while they're sleeping with your husband. She picked up her purse, leaving the scattered papers on the table like evidence at a crime scene. You can have each other. You've already taken everything else. As Kate reached for the door handle, she turned back one final time. David sat with his head in his hands and Susie stared at her with red-rimmed eyes full of guilt and regret. The saddest part, Kate said, her voice breaking slightly, is that I would have helped you through your divorce, Susie. If you'd just been honest about your feelings, if you'd come to me instead of going behind my back, we could have figured something out. I would have let him go if it meant that much to both of you. But you chose deception instead of truth, and that's something I'll never understand. She walked out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving behind 20 years of marriage and friendship in a room that smelled of betrayal and broken promises. 3 months later, Kate stood in her sister Margaret's kitchen in Columbus, washing dishes and watching snow fall through the window. The divorce papers had been signed last week, and she'd started a new job at an insurance company downtown. The small apartment above Margaret's garage wasn't much, but it was hers, and for the first time in months, she felt peace. He drove by again yesterday, Margaret said, drying a plate with more force than necessary. 3rd time this week. Should I call the police? Kate shook her head. He's not threatening anyone. He's just processing, I suppose. Through the window, Kate had seen David's blue pickup drive slowly past Margaret's house, the same truck she'd spotted outside Susie's apartment that devastating afternoon. According to Margaret, who still lived in Millbrook and heard all the gossip, David and Susie's relationship had imploded within weeks of Kate's departure. Apparently, building a romance on lies and betrayal didn't create a strong foundation for love. The support group meets tonight, Margaret reminded her. You should come. Linda said 3 new women joined this week. Kate dried her hands thoughtfully. She'd started attending a group for women who'd experienced infidelity, initially for her own healing, but increasingly to help others navigate their pain. Sharing her story had become a source of strength, turning her betrayal into something that could help other women reclaim their lives. I'll be there, Kate said. I want to finish this letter first. She returned to the small desk by the window where she'd been writing, not a journal entry or a letter to David, but advice for women facing similar situations. The local newspaper had asked her to write a monthly column about recovery and resilience after betrayal. Kate picked up her pen and continued writing. The day I stopped being their victim was the day I started becoming myself again. It wasn't the day I found the evidence or confronted them, or even the day I moved out. It was the day I realized that their choices said everything about who they were and nothing about who I was. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in fresh white that reminded Kate of new beginnings. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda, her group facilitator, sharing a message from a woman whose husband had left her for her sister. Kate smiled and began typing a response, knowing that helping someone else heal would continue her own healing process. She glanced at David's last letter, which sat unopened on the desk. Margaret had brought it from Millbrook 3 days ago, along with several others Kate hadn't read. She picked it up, weighing it in her hands, then placed it in the drawer with the rest. Some chapters of life needed to stay closed. Instead, she turned back to her column, writing about the unexpected gift that betrayal had given her, the chance to discover her own strength, to help others find theirs, and to build a life based on truth instead of comfortable lies. As evening approached, Kate gathered her coat and car keys, ready to drive to the support group meeting. She paused at the mirror by the door and saw a woman she was still getting to know. Older than the wife she'd been 3 months ago, but stronger, clearer, more herself than she'd been in years. For the first time since that terrible night at Riverside Diner, Kate Morrison smiled with genuine happiness. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing everything in pristine white, and Kate stepped into it knowing that tomorrow would bring more healing, more growth, and more opportunities to turn her pain into purpose for others, walking the same difficult path toward wholeness.